Witam Państwa z serca Doliny Krzemowej, z Palo Alto. Nazywam się Piotr Moncarz. Jestem prezesem Poland in Silicon Valley Center for Science, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Z siedziby naszego wspólnego przedsięwzięcia serdecznie witamy magnificencję rektorów. Szanownych Państwa, w dzisiejszym webinarium rozpoczynamy dialog między naszym wspólnym centrum w Dolinie Krzemowej i jego partnerami uniwersyteckimi w Polsce. Nasze cotygodniowe webinaria z Doliny Krzemowej do Was są wstępem do Waszych przesłań do nas, które my wraz z Wami będziemy rozpropagowywać po naszej stronie oceanu. Pozdrawiam serdecznie i przekazuję mikrofon koledze Patryk Consorti, członkowi zarządu centrum, który poprowadzi dzisiejszą rozmowę.
Well, thank you very much, Piotr, and I have to apologize to the audience. My Polish is not as fluent as Piotr. So we're going to get started. And hi, Barry. Welcome to this broadcast, and thank you for your participation to this program of the Poland Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, California.
Good morning to you,
We are
Patrick.
sitting right now. It's a beautiful day here. So we're here to talk about the evolution of design thinking. So and we picked this topic because this is the essence of Silicon Valley. Really, it's part of the DNA. And our audience today is composed of presidents, executives, faculty members, researchers, and staff of the most prestigious Polish universities, who are at the core of the center's agenda for science, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Quick introduction, Barry. You're a professor of industrial and interaction design at the California College of the Arts, and for more than 30 years, you've been consulting professor in design group at the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Stanford University. You're also a fellow of IDEO and the author, most importantly, of 6 books, principally on design. And there are 2 of them that I like particularly is Make It New, The History of Silicon Valley Design, and Changed by Design, that you wrote with Tim Brown. So
Well, the only corrections is it's 8 books now, not 6.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I've added the University of California, Berkeley to my teaching assignments.
Congratulations. So you have the 2 cathedrals of knowledge in the Bay Area. Congratulations for that. Brilliant. We'll have the opportunity to celebrate. So the topic, design thinking, as I just mentioned, that it's part of the DNA of Silicon Valley, and this is what we are here to offer to our colleagues in Poland. That is, this series of webinar is to give them a glimpse of what Silicon Valley does and to make it relevant also for them, because this center is most importantly a hub for inviting and welcoming our Polish friends here. So back to the origin, can you tell us the concept of design thinking? What is it? How it got started? And maybe some of the milestones that along the way this interdisciplinary approach to problem took ground in Silicon Valley.
Sure. And I can also say it's generated a fair amount of interest in Poland in recent years. I've had the opportunity to travel 3 times across Poland in the last 3 years and had lots of pretty interesting conversations. The background is it's interesting and it's curious. For many, many years, designers were mainly in the business of improving the appearance and sometimes, excuse me, the functioning of physical products. You improve a toaster, you make it look better, work better, be safer. The way I would put it is at a certain point, it became evident that designers were not simply improving the appearance of things, but adding significant value to the companies that they were working for. And it became almost inevitable at that point that people began to ask, and when I say people, I'm talking about McKinsey, I'm talking about the Harvard Business Review. They began to ask, so what is it that designers actually do? How do designers work? And even how do designers think? So what came out of that is after, I don't know, perhaps 15, 20 years ago, we began to explore the idea that there is a kind of a distinct process involved in design, and it's a process that's more about innovation and creativity and problem solving than simply giving form to objects. And that becomes interesting to companies and organizations because it's something that can be learned by people who are not design professionals.
Excellent. So that's a very good way to situate a little bit how it got started. Now, I mentioned cross-disciplinary collaboration. So in which sense and how can design thinking foster a better collaboration between all kinds of people and competence in business, in engineering, in the arts? So can you explain how it can really make this magic sauce of collaboration work better?
Sure, that's where the fun really starts to happen. So when I would sit down around a table at the beginning, we call it the kickoff of a design project at IDEO. And if you can imagine a table and there are 8 people sitting around it, one of them might be a mechanical engineer. One of them might have been trained in an art school in graphic design. There might be somebody who's a coding expert, an anthropologist, my friend Peter, who has a PhD in applied linguistics, um, and somebody with an MBA, who may or may not also have a technical or an artistic background as well. And I would never ask, so which one of you is the designer? Because the point is, it's a design team. And what happens when you get that kind of a collaboration, rather than silos in which something passes from R&D to engineering to design that puts it in a nice shell and then to marketing. What happens when there is this real-time collaboration among members of a team with that kind of a diversity is pretty extraordinary. And I can think of, any number of examples of where a project may have started out as essentially an engineering project. And it became clear that for all of their gifts, engineers are trained in a rather specific way, and they don't necessarily have the tools to appreciate what's involved in moving something from a technology to a product. So I'm going to give you an example of that. There are many, many that come to mind, but we did a project at IDEO that may resonate with you, Patrick. It was for a company called Cisco that you might have heard of. And they had asked us to help with the design of what became the first voice over the internet phone. I think it was the 8200.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Okay, so the Cisco engineers had designed this thing with an amazing array of features to it, but they had apparently never gone out into the field and sat down with, I don't know, a travel agent who might be putting the thing next to her face 50 times a day. And the rather radical and for the engineers somewhat uncomfortable proposal that we made is eliminate most of those features. They are simply not relevant. They make it more complicated, harder to use. And what came out of it, I think you can attest, is one of the most successful and best-selling products in the history of the company.
An interesting point there that you made earlier is that if I understand, design thinking was born in a university setting.
Yeah.
And so we have an audience today of distinguished university members.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more how was it accidental? How did it get started?
No, not accidental at all. I always hesitate to go too deeply in, excuse me. I get very emotional when I talk.
All right.
I
Good.
always hesitate to go too deeply into the academic side, but since some of the people in our audience are academics, I roll up my sleeves. And
All right.
the kind of short version of that is back in the 1960s, some extremely advanced theorists, I would say, Herbert Simon, Nobel laureate in economics, and others began to ask whether it's possible to imagine a science of design. He called it a science of the artificial. So we have sciences of the natural world, biology, geology, physics, chemistry, which deal with an invariant subject matter. And then what about that part of our world where things change, the social world, the cultural world, the world of human behavior, of the arts? And Simon was among the first to ask whether we can develop a science to address that part of the world. It was followed by a group in Britain and then also at Berkeley, as it happens, who took it to the next level of asking whether, okay, if the idea of a science of design is perhaps a little bit too optimistic, can we at least begin to think of a methodology of design that would be shared
There you go. Yep.
across all design projects? And that, kind of sputtered a little bit, and it became a popular field of exploration. They call it the design methods movement. And then much more recently, and this is now going back to I would say the 1990s, we began to see in places like Stanford, where I was pretty deeply involved until my retirement last August, uh, the attempt to step back from a rigorous science or a specific methodology and try to understand, almost as a philosophy, an approach to problem solving. And that became deeply rooted as design thinking. And it's somewhat to our surprise and even occasionally to our embarrassment, it caught on and is now really a worldwide movement.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that you mentioned very often is that you are doing this inside the Department of Mechanical Engineering, right?
Yeah. That's where my appointment was at Stanford. There is at Stanford a design group. It has a long and a distinguished tradition. It was initially conceived as a collaboration between the engineering school and the art department.
Mhm.
And this was at a time when, those folks used to play tennis with each other after school once in a while. But the idea of them all being together under the same roof was, to put it mildly, unusual. But the Stanford Design Program became kind of a model for this interdisciplinary approach, and it had two really interesting impacts. One of which is it taught uh, engineers that their practice could be conceived as a creative practice and not simply technical problem solving in a cubicle somewhere. And that was a really strong piece of it. And on the other side, it was to teach people such as myself, I actually come from the humanities, that they're not the enemy, to put
All
it kind
right.
of simply, and that if we are going to make any headway in changing the world in the directions that we want, we are absolutely
You
dependent.
had to bring down the wall, basically, right? As some
Exactly. Yeah.
famous said, right?
So then the next evolution of the Stanford program was the creation of a design school, which was initially very generously funded by Hasso Plattner of SAP. And it's kind of funny because we previously had the engineers on one side of the big atrium and the designers on the other, and they called that part of the D school the demilitarized zone.
Well,
So
since we're
if I could
getting
add one more
yeah,
little
yeah.
detail about that, which I think may be interesting to your audience. In the current iteration of the Stanford D School, most of the students are not design students, and that is the point. They come from the medical school or the engineering school or law or business or the social sciences. And the point is not to try to convert them to become designers, but to train them in a design process and a way of thinking that they can take back to medicine or law or business or engineering, and apply those skills to what they normally do.
Well, that's a good segue, and I wanted to talk about something more personal, but let me go back to this point that you made, bringing down the walls and trying to get this interdisciplinary approach. And so if you look at what it produces, okay, so the idea is, oh, we're going to put people that are different background in the hope that what comes out of it is bigger than if we were to have them do this individually. So what have you seen is the impact of technology on design thinking? And how does the rise of digital technology also shape the principle of design thinking? How do you see a little bit the future of it all, particularly when you look at artificial intelligence? So the question is, okay, we understand how it was conceived, how it evolved to bring people of different background. And so what do you think now that the impact of technology is going to have on design thinking?
Oh boy, well, it's a huge issue. Obviously, we are as we enter into the uncharted territory of Gen AI, for instance, things are moving at such breakneck speed that any prediction that we try to make today is likely to be an embarrassment tomorrow. I think you probably know what I mean by that. The larger background is that, as I said earlier, designers have traditionally been in the business of improving existing products. And what design thinking has really been all about is dealing with a world in which we are confronting whole new product categories. So just to, the IDEO story is rather significant in this regard. IDEO was formed in about 1980, which folks like you and me remember very well as the period in which digital technologies, computers and all of the peripherals and all of the online equivalents began to move for the first time from the B2B world into the consumer market, which is to say the point where they affect the lives of people and they scale. So it's no longer a world in which we're selling a few tens of thousands of mainframes, but we're selling a few billion iPhones.
Thank you, brother Steve Jobs.
Yeah, okay, exactly. So what we found was that it was not a question of improving something familiar, improving your hair dryer or your toaster or your vacuum cleaner, but of creating a language for entirely new categories of products. So you mentioned Steve Jobs, and the iconic story, which I cannot tell too often, is he walks into the studio. It was then called David Kelly Design in 1979, I think it was, and had just come from the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, where he saw Xerox's prototype of basically the world's first personal computer, desktop computer. And it had a mix of text, graphics, and data on the screen. It was connected to a laser printer, connected to every other computer in the Xerox lab through an Ethernet. And what the scientists were doing was controlling what was on the screen with a little handheld device, which was called an XY position indicator. And Jobs went crazy and he went out looking for somebody who could take that piece of scientific instrumentation of a $500 gadget and turn it into a $20 appliance that could be used on your jeans, literally. And so he asked them, can you guys design, they call it Xerox, they called it a mouse. Can you guys design a mouse? Well, of course we can design a mouse. We just graduated from Stanford. We can design anything. So they signed a contract, Jobs left, and they looked at each other. Does anybody know what a mouse is? So that is the kind of prototype story of new technologies forcing new ways of thinking. And in those days, the mouse was really a mechanical and electrical problem. Today, bring in hand surgeons, bringing in behavioral scientists, the whole realm of human-computer interaction specialists to understand the behaviors surrounding a highly technical artifact.
Yeah.
And that's just been ongoing, and we're in that world today with the uncharted territory of AI.
Yeah, and the man and the machine and that interaction, right? So incredible. So going back
Man, woman, and
yeah,
children.
and exactly, that's a good point. Yeah, who are way ahead of us, right?
Yes.
Coming back to something more personal. So in Make It New, you said something interesting for people interested in Silicon Valley, and you host a lot of people that come to Silicon Valley because you're one of the the people who know the most from the history, but also the future, or how it's going to at least some scenario. And so you quote in your introduction, rarely does a month go by in which I do not host a delegation of visitors who hope to build a Silicon Valley in Ireland or Poland or Chile or Taiwan, unquote. And what is the answer to this question?
Did I say Poland? Oh my.
You did. It's in your book.
Okay. Yes, and I actually remember that visit very well because I had a colleague at IDEO who was half Finnish and half Polish. And we had a very international workforce. And I asked her to meet the delegation, and they were shocked when she greeted them in Polish
Very well.
before switching to Finnish. Um, it's actually quite true. I personally receive delegations. This is not really an exaggeration, but several times a month
Yeah.
from many parts of the world. And the question is always some version of, given your success, how do we build a Silicon Valley in our country? So I have been to Bogota, Colombia, where they are trying to build a Silicon Valley in the capital. I've been to Western Ontario, where they are trying to build a Silicon Valley in Waterloo, Ontario, and many, many other parts of the world, including some very, very advanced technology environments in Zhongguancun in China and elsewhere. So the first thing is, yeah, let's acknowledge Silicon Valley is responsible for the world's first desktop computer, the world's first autonomous vehicles, the world's first social networks, the world's first video games. Not just new products, but whole new industries have their origins here. 5 out of the $9 trillion companies in the world have their headquarters in Silicon Valley. It's getting more than half of all global investment today in artificial intelligence. So there are very good reasons to pay attention to what's happening in this little compact piece of real estate. But the position that I always take is what happened in Silicon Valley is the result of the confluence of a unique set of circumstances. I call them assets. Some of them are universities, some of them are a venture capital industry, a legal infrastructure, and a few others. And the point is not simply to copy or recreate a unique meeting of assets that happened in one place, but to identify your own assets and see what needs to be done in your own environment to bring them together and to mobilize them. And then I think I say in the book, stand back, light the fuse, and watch to see what happens.
Yeah, and it is particularly relevant for the center because Silicon Valley is no longer just a space, a physical space, but it's a
Clearly.
space of how we can collaborate, right? And so, whereas before you would take your car down to the next lab, like Steve did up on the hill to park and
Yeah.
come to see you at IDEO. Now you can do this with a Zoom, or you can do this anywhere. And so the
Yeah.
ability of anybody in the world to connect with anybody somewhere else in the world to focus on what the problem is indeed the Silicon Valley. But this is a
Yeah.
very,
And that was, of course, greatly accelerated by the tragedy of the pandemic, in which we were
right.
forced into those collaborations. Otherwise, everything would have simply stopped. So yeah, that is absolutely happening. Another interesting aspect of the pandemic is uh, 5 of the major Silicon Valley companies had just completed major new campuses, like building physical buildings, which you and I have visited. And then the pandemic struck and everybody went home. And the buildings, these campuses were largely emptied out.
Prolonged timing, yes.
And it's either, okay, we'll stop all activity at Apple or Microsoft or NVIDIA or Google, or we will find other ways of collaborating. And of course, it was the latter. And so for all of the tragedy, 1 million Americans died in that in that period. Some things came out of the pandemic that have permanently altered the process of work, the processes of collaboration.
Which, by the way,
And if I can make just
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to go back to the question that you asked a moment ago about replicating or copying the Silicon Valley experience. I've met with a number of Chinese business groups, and again, the question is frequently, how do we build a Silicon Valley in some part of Eastern China in the Pearl River? The cultures are so radically different that it can't happen. It's the wrong question. Other things can happen that are terrifically exciting, but can you undo 2,500 years of a Confucian educational system overnight? No. Should you try? No. Can you do something else? Yes.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And so, in fact, in this book, Make It New, what would you like people to the readers to take away from the book? And I encourage anybody to look it up, Make It New. It's available if you type Make It New on Google or whatever search engine, you'll find it. But what would you like people to take away from the book?
Well,
So
first,
that,
I'd be delighted if it were translated into Polish.
okay, well, how about somebody volunteering to do that?
Maybe that's next. A couple of things. One is I attempted in the book to answer a question that had really bothered me, and that is we have a huge number of design professionals, design studios, design consultancies in the area, but they had never received any particular attention in the dozens, maybe hundreds of books on Silicon Valley, which are typically about Silicon Valley technology, Silicon Valley business, the place of the government in Silicon Valley or the military. And it really puzzled me that there had been no attention given to the role of the design industry. So that's what I began to investigate, and I thought that it probably started around the time that the computer entered the consumer market, and I discovered that the story is actually much, much older. So it's about a 70 or 80-year history that I tried to account. I think the first thing I would like people to take away from is that design is not what you think it is. So design is not styling, or yes, of course, some parts of it are, but design is the much more fundamental activity of turning a technology into a product. So most human beings do not buy printed circuit boards, but they buy laptop computers and tablets. Most people, you might be an exception, do not buy internal combustion engines. You buy a car. Most people don't code in Python, although many do, but everybody downloads apps. So what is the process of turning a technology into a product where it scales and enters people's lives? I call that design. I mean, that's basically my definition of what design means. And it means understanding human beings, human behaviors, human cultures. And that's where your first question about collaborations comes in. So that's the first part of it, and the second part of if people take a message from my work, it's that design in this broader sense has successfully played a critical role in building the ecosystem of one of the most powerful innovation engines in the world, and that is our neighborhood in Silicon Valley.
Mhm. Right. No, absolutely. And so the making of this set of ecosystem or this ecosystem is really takes different discipline and an openness. And so if we look at Poland has an enormous pool of talent, particularly in research and in industry and so on. And they're very sociable as well, as we know our friends in Poland. And
Yes.
so I think these are two very key elements of this social ability, the ability to get together from different
Yeah.
walks of life. So this is a bit what we're trying to do here at the center. And so if you think about education now, the design thinking and education, so what role do you believe design education could play fostering this innovation concept for the 21st century? And with in mind, Poland, who you visited, a few times, and there are places like, for example, the California College of the Arts, where you do this on a daily basis. So can you give us a little bit the not the secret sauce, but your experience on how to,
Sure.
the education role in design thinking?
Good question and deceptively complex. I have so I
But the
would love
beauty
to
of it is
say,
that you have the art of simplifying everything and make us understand complex things. That's
yeah.
design, right?
I'll preface it by people in Poland may not have heard of something called Sayre's Law, Sayre. And according to Sayre's Law, in academic controversies, the passions run so high because the stakes are so low. So it can be open warfare sometimes, and I don't want
All
to
right.
minimize that. However, um, uh, what we've been trying to do at all three of the places that I am involved in, Berkeley, Stanford, and California College of the Arts, is in very different ways, find ways of achieving the collaboration between, to put it simply, the technical disciplines and the creative disciplines, or rather to view the technical disciplines as creative and the creative disciplines as depending on technology. So I described a little bit about the Stanford programs. We have at Berkeley, where I've just joined the faculty, something called the Jacobs Institute of Design Innovation, which is offering undergraduate and graduate degrees now in exactly as it says, design innovation. And we're teaching methods and frameworks and almost a philosophy of design as well as the technical side of it. And at the art school, that's where it actually gets most complicated because every engineer I've ever met would like to think of himself as an artist. But many artists see engineering and technology as the enemy. I became an artist to get away from that world, and we're trying to heal that mistaken illness, mental condition, I think. The best example that I would give to a European audience is to think back 100 years to the Bauhaus in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So the Bauhaus was an absolutely new innovation in education. And they couldn't hire designers because there was no, on the faculty, because there was no such thing. So they had two categories of faculty. They called them masters of form and workshop masters. And they had the idea that if they put students in the middle between these two different groups, a new breed of student would be the result. And those students would be called designers. So what we're trying to do now in all three of the places where I am now teaching, despite trying very hard to retire, what we are trying to do is, in a sense, put two rival groups of experts together in the hopes that the students who get caught in the space in between them will become a new breed of talent. And I don't know what we want to call them. Maybe we'll still call them designers, but maybe we will call them innovation experts, or maybe we will call them multidisciplinary visionaries. I don't really care what we call them, but it's about uh, taking the existing strengths of our world, combining them in such a way that the next generation is different than the sum total of the parts. It's something new.
So we're about to conclude, but I wanted to also look at in a situation where the center wants to really foster this spirit of collaboration and the tyranny of distance, Poland being far away, but we do have visitors here. So other than a physical presence of our friends from Poland here at the center in Palo Alto, you know. This interactive discussion that you and I have, unfortunately, cannot be extended to the audience, and they could have Q&A and so on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just a free willing discussion here. What do you see a good, efficient way of getting this spirit of collaboration, not being in the same room, because I think that makes a difference. Just trying to make it more efficient and as a complement to being together in here. So it's kind of an hybrid, how do you manage this hybrid situation here to get equally good result or better?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think any of us should pretend that that will be easy or straightforward. That is an experiment that we will all be collectively participating in. for the coming decade, I think. And
Mhm.
I would say, again, referring back to what I can only call the tragedy of the pandemic, that gave us many of the tools, such as the tools that we are using right now. I mean, we used to have Zoom conferences occasionally and everybody grumbled, and then it became routine and it's almost replaced the telephone in many work environments. So the good news is that we have all become accustomed to exploring different modalities of communication and uh, international collaborations across oceans and continents, which can take place from your bedroom,
Mhm.
if you want. So we are all doing that. There's a rather interesting anecdote, if I may. Jensen Huang, who is CEO of NVIDIA, as everybody knows, in overseeing the building of a new campus for NVIDIA, he ordered the monitors taken out of all conference rooms because he felt that that creates an artificial divide, an artificial hierarchy between the important people who are in the room and the people who are dialing in remotely. And his feeling was everybody's got a laptop now anyway, so we can have our meeting actually more effectively if
Mhm.
we don't have this kind of artificial hierarchy created. So all I can really say there is, yeah, we should aim to get together physically whenever it is practically possible, because something happens when people are in the same room and
Exactly.
feeding off their, body language and things like that. But the reality is that will happen infrequently. It's expensive, it's environmentally destructive. So when it cannot happen, we should be, of course, exploring the existing digital tools, and there are so many now. It's just crazy. I mean, I'm sitting with a group of design students and somebody pulls up a Figma or a mural and they're moving digital post-it notes around and annotating them. And the coming generation is finding this routine. Old guys like me, I'm struggling with it.
Well,
Um,
right, you're
it
pretty good
will,
at it, though.
it
Mhm.
it is becoming routine, and it will be more and more so in time.
So, and this is a design challenge, actually, right? To
It
design
is
a new way
absolutely.
of interacting, etc.
Yeah,
And
you say we're
well,
we're running low on time, so if I
yeah,
could just make two
go
two
ahead.
observations about design thinking. If you look it up on the web, you'll see all kinds of methods and stages and all of this. I say ignore all that. There are really just two basic principles that I would love to leave people with. One of which is there's no problem that cannot be approached as a design problem, including the one that you just mentioned about collaboration across borders. And the other is you don't have to be a designer to think like one.
Phenomenal conclusion. And by the way, may I add that you've traveled frequently in Europe and in one country in particular these days, Ukraine,
Yeah.
which is not far from Poland. So we'll make sure that talking about physical presence, there are many opportunities for you to mingle with our friends on the other side that
I would certainly love that opportunity. I have crossed Poland on my way to Ukraine now since the war began, and that is in the context of teaching courses in design thinking at the Catholic University in Lviv.
excellent, excellent. Well, a big thank you for this moment, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions that we'll have from our audience, and we'll make sure to make a summary of all these questions. This is the beginning of a dialogue. We're so proud and happy to have you on this program. And again, thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, Patrick, and I certainly I welcome questions from anybody in the audience. I can handle them digitally.
All right, great. And so there are some questions here. There's one from Piotr actually. What are, in your opinion, the key tips of setting up a new product innovation process in a small company that currently doesn't have one? So they start from scratch. Okay, so he says that he taught at the university. I was taught at university about stage gate, and I understand it works with big corporation as well. But how do you make the transition from not having a process into all to gradually having one? So this is really scaling within an organization of the design thinking?
Yeah. Um, People may know the quote that is attributed to Picasso, but in fact, many people have said it, which is good artists borrow, great artists steal. A small organization, I would take advantage of the proliferation of resources that can be found online in other companies, within universities, and adapt them in whatever way that you can to the specific requirements, the specific resources of the organization that you are in. So it does not necessarily involve an investment in hiring. I mean, I'm the last person that should say don't hire lots of designers. Please hire as many as you can, preferably my students. But failing that, I think that it is quite practical uh, to imagine borrowing techniques, occasionally people, other sorts of resources that have already been developed elsewhere.
Great. And we have an interesting question from a practitioner of design thinking in Poland who's been doing this for over 20 years. This is Adam. And he's pushing the envelope. He say, okay, what's next, right? And you and I, with a few other people, have looked at the design fiction, okay? So in fact, you participated to some project there. So how would you take to the next stage, design thinking expanded, and how does design fiction or any other form of design thinking that has
Yeah.
evolved
Yeah.
in modern incarnation?
Good question, and thank you, Adam. You referenced the book by Tim Brown. I wrote that book together with Tim. This is called Change by Design. The biggest obstacle, main challenge, and it's a very good and pertinent question. For me, it is something that you may have identified in your own long career teaching these materials. Design thinking has, I think, unfortunately, been reduced to a methodology, a kind of a rote to follow these 5 stages, put a problem into the design thinking machine, turn the crank, and boom, out pops an iPhone at the other end. And as you know very well, it's simply not like that. Nothing happens with that kind of mechanical simplicity. So there are right now a whole lot of people teaching courses and giving workshops and doing lectures in design thinking, and I am one of them. And I would say the biggest obstacle right now is its success. And that sounds peculiar to say, but that's actually what I mean. So when something becomes too routine, it becomes mechanical and the creative thought begins to evaporate. So I think the biggest challenge is to step back from the methods and to try to reformulate it as essentially a philosophy of problem solving, using the tools. The way I like to think about it is designers have been around for about 100 years. We've been making things for thousands of years, but the design professions are about a century old. And in the course of that century, we've acquired a whole lot of tools, tricks, techniques, call them what you want. And I think of design thinking as reaching into that toolkit that we've been building up over a century and taking out the tools that are necessary to solve the problem that you're working on, and turning that from a kind of a metaphor of a toolkit into something practical. I'm not going to minimize the challenge of doing that, but I think that's really where we want to be going. So again, away from a structured methodology and towards something that is much more loose and open-ended and imaginative.
Mhm. Yeah, so when I attend a design fiction
Oh
seminar
yeah,
workshop, I'm at awe. I mean, it's unbelievable. After probably half an hour, when you put people in that setting,
yeah,
the ideas suddenly are coming through, and when they project themselves, 5 years out and try to come back at what they can do today, this is so powerful. And getting all the tools that you mentioned, it's so obvious that they are there, and if we utilize them in a very broad sense with the objective to, projecting yourself, but also to do this journey back to say, what can I do today? And thank God the technology allows you to build the things that you thought were inimaginable because before you'd had to have all the right material, the right people, but now it's a world of now. You can actually build a future today. And it's just the set of tools enables that voyage and some journey there.
And I think that design fiction is one of those tricks that's in the toolkit.
Yeah.
And it should not be mistaken for predicting the future. It's looking at developments that are underway in technology, in engineering, in social life, and extrapolating them into the future. So it's primarily, I believe, about preparing clients, preparing companies, organizations, NGOs, or whatever it is, for possible futures, so that when something like generative AI hits us, it's not going to throw everything into total chaos.
That's right. And talking about chaos, Olga has an interesting twist to it. She says, "What do I say to my students? I'm a lecturer. How can I use, AI, in a positive way?" So my answer would be, it's just another tool. I mean, like we had, the first networks, to communicate email and this and that. So, but you may have a different perspective as to what Olga.
No, I think it's true. So the large language models that are proliferating right now, and you probably know some of the numbers. ChatGPT-4 was launched in November 2022. Within 2 months, it had been used by 100 million people, which is the fastest technology adoption of any product in history, period. So what we are confronting is a technology that will touch every industry, including and maybe even especially academic life. So the first months of the release of the large language models, Chat, Claude, the others, it threw my academic environments into chaos. And people are, what, when I'm looking at student work, am I looking at their work? Am I looking at Chat GPT-4? Am I looking at some indecipherable combination of the two? Shall we forbid students from using it? Shall we do something else? And my general feeling is that it is a tool that we now have, and telling students not to use it would be like telling them not to use the encyclopedia in a previous generation. It would be crazy not to. So we are in the process, and I don't have an answer for you, Olga, on what you should specifically tell them, but the general perspective I have is that it's our job now in academia to figure out the guardrails, the guidelines, the protocols for how we use this incredibly powerful tool creatively and honestly in order to advance what we're doing. And the possibilities, they're just insane. They're enormous. It's staggering, but we really have to rethink what original work means. It's nothing short of that, and that's not going to be easy. That is a problem in real time that you and I are struggling with.
And
You
thank
more
God.
than I am, because I'm on my way out.
Well, I'm there too. But thank God, humans are the most adaptable species on Earth. So we given this
Yeah.
gift of being extremely adaptable. So I'll pass on some of the reference Adam mentioned, but it's very interesting. He's quoting Herbert Simon and so on. So this is very good. And Adam, I encourage you to after this webinar to connect with the center, with me or Barry, to continue this conversation. It looks like you have extremely good knowledge of that discipline, and so
Yeah, Adam's Adam's bibliography looks like the syllabus of the course that I'm teaching right now.
Exactly. And so that's the very essence of these webinars, is to not only give you a little bit of what we see in Silicon Valley, we call it the lab of the future, but also is to create this bridge between you in Poland and us in Silicon Valley. So Adam, feel free to shoot out an email, and we can continue this conversation. Why not create project around that? So maybe we take another couple of questions. Barbara has a question. So I'll let you answer Barbara's question here, since you see it at the same time.
Yeah, I see Barbara's question. What do I think about, excuse me, what do I think about things becoming more simple, less detailed over time? Do you think that simplicity is causing the world to become more bland over time? No, I think the opposite. I mean, obviously, there will be any number of cases where we've removed so many features that we've got something boring and generic. But I think in general, what we are looking at is removing more and more of the obstacles that come between a person and a product. And it becomes much less about the product itself and much more about the interaction between us and it. So the fewer the obstacles, and those can be features and those can be details, but the fewer of those that there are, I think overall we will see a much cleaner interaction between human beings and the world that we are struggling to inhabit. And so I'm not concerned about that. I think it's in general probably a good thing, and I look forward to it.
Beautiful. All right, since we don't have any other question, and we can be on this for hours and have a drink afterwards.
That's
But and we hope that this occasion will present itself either in Poland or here at our center in Palo Alto. We want to thank the audience for, and I know that there's quite a few students as well. I want to thank them all for participating.
Adam, Barbara, Olga, Piotr, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Well, thank you again, and see you soon.
Patrick, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I always learn something from our conversations, and I would love to have the opportunity to meet our friends in Poland.
Wonderful. Thank you for that attention. It would be great. And we'll make sure to make that opportunity happen. Thank you.
Let's do it. Bye.
Goodbye.